Major new threat targeting our nation's critical infrastructure. We learned this week that hackers have broken into the computers controlling our utilities, the lifelines for water, gas, and power. Our experts here to weigh in on the dangerous consequences and what can be done to prevent them. After this from ABC senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas.
FAA just issued a critical alert. The entire network went down.
In the movie Live Free or Die Hard, able to shut down the nation's power grid and transportation networks. That kind of dramatic threat may not just be the stuff of Hollywood fiction, but in fact closer to reality than you think. Sources tell ABC News hackers from overseas secretly planted malicious software inside computer systems serving our nation's most important services and industries. Water treatment facilities, power plants, gas pipelines, all critical for daily life, now potentially at risk. Authorities believe this electronic Trojan horse was inserted into computer systems years ago, but has not been activated. They've given this malicious code an ominous name, Black Energy. In theory, Black Energy could allow a hacker to turn off a generator, flood a water treatment plant, or shut down a gas pipeline. The threat is ongoing. ABC News obtained a new Homeland Security bulletin that warns utility owners and operators to look for signs of compromise and to report any suspected intrusion immediately. U.S. officials are worried because they have hard evidence that such a cyber attack is possible. In this test, government hackers forced this generator to self-destruct with a series of simple keystrokes. Watch. The generator is literally shaking itself apart. As for Black Energy, the primary suspects, operatives tied to the Russian government. And sources say it resembles malicious software used in recent attacks on NATO and unclassified White House computer systems. It may all point to the beginning of a new Cold War, with the Internet as part of the battlefield.
Terrorism is still the #1 national security threat, but we've seen cyber grow at an alarming rate. And the threats that we face, the number of actors, the number of breaches, this is a real problem.
It's a new world where threats you cannot see can reach out and touch you. For this week, Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
Thanks to Pierre. We're joined now by ABC News contributor, former White House counterterrorism advisor Richard Clark, and Democratic Congressman Jim Langevin from the Armed Services Committee. Welcome to you both. And Richard, let me begin with you. Since you've left the government, you've devoted a lot of time and study to the threat from cyber attacks, and you've concluded that we're a lot more vulnerable now than we were then?
I think that's right. I think nation states have been building cyber armies, cyber commands, including the United States. And there's probably a half dozen nations around the world that have already put these logic bombs in each other's networks. Not that they're going to use them unless they go to war. So unless we in the Soviet...
So explain that a little bit. This Black Energy malware, which is now in our systems, we believe. Why just park there?
Well, because you want to be able to get in when you can get in. It may be that if you wait, it'll be too late to get in. New defenses will be created. You want to have the ability to push a button when the war starts and bring the enemy to his knees. And so most modern nations now have tried this with their potential enemies.
And Congressman, you know, the federal government has also studied these threats to the power grid and showing the vulnerability of our power grid. Attacks on a small number of transmission stations could create a coast-to-coast blackout. Larger scale attacks could cause the whole power grid to collapse. How serious is this threat?
It is very serious, and I've been talking about this for a number of years, going back to about 2007, when I chaired the Homeland Security Subcommittee that had jurisdiction over cybersecurity. And we did a deep dive on this, looking at how vulnerable critical infrastructure is, in particular how vulnerable our electric grid is. And we found that it's very vulnerable.
So what could
Idaho
happen?
National Labs actually did that study that showed that the generator, through a SCADA attack, that's a systems control and data acquisition system attack, could be used to cause a generator or a number of generators to blow themselves up. And you could see a whole sector of the country without electricity for a period of not just days or weeks, but potentially months, because these generators are large. They're not just like batteries that are sitting on a shelf that you can take one out and plug another one in. These generators take months to build, ship, and install.
So, Richard Clark, what can be done to prevent that?
Well, very little. But the thing here to really bear in mind is this is not about to happen. We have nuclear weapons. We haven't used them. We have cyber weapons, and we've seldom used them. The United States did do a cyber attack on Iran and destroyed some nuclear centrifuges. But this is a contingency, and it's very unlikely that it'll be used by nation states. The real worry is that eventually non-state actors, maybe even terrorist groups, will gain this capability.
Is that the real threat, Congressman?
Yeah, it is the real threat, and Richard hit it right on the point right now. Right now, these worst weapons and cyber weapons are in the hands of nation states who have the capability but not necessarily the will to use them. But then you have groups like ISIL or Al-Qaeda that certainly would have the intent but not the weapons. And that gap, that divide, if you will, is becoming much more narrow, and eventually the worst actors will have the worst weapons, and they very potentially will use them against us. I've been trying to raise the alarm on this, as Richard has been, to try to close that aperture of vulnerability. This is not a problem that we're ever going to solve. It's one that we need to manage. We need to close the aperture of vulnerability to something that is much more manageable. So what we need to do in Congress is pass an information sharing bill. That bill passed almost unanimously out of the House Intelligence Committee, in which I sit. It passed the House with strong bipartisan support, and now we're waiting for the Senate to take it up. That would allow classified threat information to be passed to the private sector. The private sector to pass the threats or the attacks that they're experiencing back to the government, so that information could be more widely shared.
Let's hope that
We
happens.
also need stronger regulatory control.
Okay,
We
let's
also
hope
need
that happens
stronger
in the new
regulatory
Congress.
control